Thank you, Do. Well, Open Book Festival has announced the stellar lineup for its new podcast series, which runs from the 8th to the 24th of November. A total of 8 podcasts will be released during the 3-week period, featuring conversations between authors and other creatives. Now, to tell us more, we're joined by the festival organizer, Vasti Calitz. Vasti, good morning. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning. Thank you for having me, Lebo.
Vasti, for somebody who may not know, give us background into the Open Book Festival. What was the inspiration behind it all those years?
So the Open Book Festival has been going for more than 10 years. We had 9 iterations before the pandemic hit. And the festival was an international festival that brought authors from all over the world. And it's based in Cape Town, happened at the Fugard Theatre every year. What we present is conversations about books and using books as a springboard for other important conversations about the state of the nation. So this year we're trying to do that in a much smaller scale and in a digital format as a podcast series.
Mm-hmm. How has the pandemic, COVID-19, affected a festival such as yours?
So dramatically. We really can't do anything that we used to do. We used to pack theatres full of audience members, hundreds of people in the audience. We used to fly people down to South Africa authors from other countries. Can't do any of that now. So what we're doing is very different. We've opted for the podcast format. Mm-hmm. And what it has in common with previous iterations of the festival is that it's still very carefully curated conversations between incredible authors.
Mm-hmm. Talk to us about this year's lineup. Who is on the lineup?
So I won't get through everything, but I will mention what we're kicking off with tomorrow, which is Conversations with Mahali. Mm-hmm. So this was an annual event at the festival where Mahali Mashego was put on stage with 3 amazing women, and they have a conversation that's broadly around issues of feminism. And this year, she's in conversation with Pumla Nkola, who's on screen now, Sipokazi Jonas, and Shayna Fife. So that's kicking off tomorrow. Mm-hmm. The conversation with Shayna is going to be released as a bonus episode because of technical issues, including load shedding. Then also this week, you can look forward to an episode we've called Nowhere to Nowhere, mm-hmm. which features Mandla Langa, Joanne Josephs, and Nick Mulgrew, and they're in conversation with Yewande Omotoso. And this is a conversation about land and belonging and exile, and these books approach it from very different angles. So Mandla's book is about the child of a man working for the ANC in exile, yes, who goes to South Africa on a quest to find his father. Joanne Joseph's book is about an Indian woman who comes to South Africa under conditions of indentured labor. And then Nick Mulgrew's book is about white flight to New Zealand. So very different angles, but then a really interesting conversation about what it means to belong and what land means for belonging emerges from that. Then also this week, we have a conversation we've called The Future is Over, Long Live the Future. And this is a panel of young debut novelists. And those novelists are Mia Ardern, Chidiso Molotane, and Tinjiwe Mswane. And this is a conversation about a sort of loss of faith in the future because of conditions of climate change and a sort of attitude that one might call it a millennial attitude of the sort of nihilism that's brought about by losing a sense of what the future holds. And then I would really like to mention at least one more, which is the one that features Damon Galgut, because he just won the Booker Prize this past week, which is very exciting. And he's in conversation with Mpumi and Tabeni and Futi and Shingila, and that's chaired by Africa Milane. And that's a conversation about shifting power relations in society and how these characters see their own power slip away as these structures around them shift.
And you've also made a deliberate choice to make sure that all the authors are South African. Why was that? Why is it such an important aspect of the festival?
It is important. And so normally we do fly in internationals, which is usually very exciting. But the past 2 years have been so difficult, for everyone, but also for authors, because authors really depend on book launches and festivals to find readers, to connect to their readers. So many people will find their new favorite book that they had no idea they wanted to read at a festival. And those platforms disappeared, more or less, at least in physical spaces in the last 2 years. And above all, we are passionate about local literature, above anything. And so we didn't want to split this platform between local and international authors when international authors might have platforms elsewhere. And I have to say, this lineup, which is completely local, also contains some of my favorite books that I've read this year. It's been a really good year for writing in South Africa, which is another really good reason to keep it local.
And talk to us about the different topics and why it was important to cover so many topics. I'm looking at the conversation that's happening on the 17th of November, Virtually Queer. And that's an important conversation that we need to be having, the LGBTI plus Q community. Why was that such an important part of the festival?
So it is very important to us to include topics like Virtually Queer. Representation is important, has always been an important guiding principle in how we put our program together. So we always make sure that certain issues are covered, including gender and queerness and race and, migration, those kinds of things. But then also these themes emerge from books published that year because these themes are important, right? So it's not... So Virtually Queer, we didn't just decide to include, we also encountered it in the books published. And that panel includes Robert Hamblin, who wrote a memoir about his transition. And it includes Efemia Chela, who has a contribution in Touch. And then Tiffany Kaguru Mugu, who not only edited a collection of essays, but also runs an online platform centering African female queer sexuality. And it's a really interesting conversation about what the internet has meant for our experience of queerness.
And the topics, how do you then decide which themes or which topics to talk about? You touched on the conversation with Yewande about grief. There's also there's a conversation that's going to happen about love. How do you decide? How do you curate all these topics?
So, on the one hand, we are guided by literature, so we try and see connecting themes in the books that we've loved this year. But then also we do try and think of things like conversations that people might want to be having now. So, for example, the one about grief, which is with Bongani Kona and Yewande Omotoso, chaired by Catherine Boole. I mean, that's a conversation that I think many of us need right now. Like, this is, not partly because of the pandemic, but also because of other things that have happened. Many of us are sitting with a lot of grief, and we need to find ways to talk about it and work through it. So that comes up in conversations with Mahali as well. And then otherwise, we try and make sure that there's a balance in the program. So there's a balance between heavier topics and lighter topics, that one topic isn't covered twice. What this set of books allows is for this conversation to happen in a particular way, that it's not happening somewhere else. So, for instance, one of the events that we've called Finding the Bones is a conversation with Madeleine Foulard and Naledi Mashishi and Ashraf Kaji. And Madeleine Foulard works for the National Prosecuting Authority, and she finds the remains of people who have been disappeared by the apartheid government. And there's a very interesting connection there between that book and the two novelists that she's in conversation with, where this theme of needing to, when certain things in the past are unresolved, then the past haunts the present and it's difficult to move forward. So that's the kind of conversation that is very specific to these books, even though the theme of being haunted by the past is a conversation that may be happening elsewhere as well.
Okay, Vasti, where do we access the series? I'm salivating enough. I can't wait for the 15th of November. That's my favorite one. Give us details. Where do people access the series?
I just want to mention that Finding the Bones is the 15th of November one. So you can find the series on our website. Our website is openbookfestival.co.za. But if you're a podcast listener, the best way to listen is on your podcast app on your phone. So you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pocket Casts, whatever you use, and just search Open Book Podcast, and then it will appear there.
All right.
Our trailer is already live, so you can already click subscribe to not miss the first episode tomorrow.
All right, Vasti, thank you so much for talking to us. She is the organizer of the Open Book Festival. She was unpacking this year's stellar lineup for its new podcast series, which runs from the 8th to the 24th of November. Oh, the words are failing me today. All right, it's just gone 8 o'clock.